The movie opens with a monologue by none other than the boy detective himself, telling us his story about being on a high-stakes mission just before a car with a polar bear at the back crashes into a living room. He takes us back in time to the beginning of his story as the famed detective solving crime in the city of Portland. Up north, he's set up his very own detective agency, which he believes is the greatest one in town, nay, the world even. He runs it with a 1,500-pound polar bear named Total, whose Arctic home was melting. He traveled the world looking for food until he eventually found Portland and found their house just as Timmy's father was running away from them. Total barged into the kitchen and ate Timmy's cereal, and just like that, they were buds. With Total in the picture, Timmy decides to add him as a partner to his budding detective agency, given his initial due diligence and responsibility. But at the end of the day, he's just a polar bear who likes to do polar bear things, like nap apparently. Together with Total, Timmy roams the streets of his Portland neighborhood using the Segway his mom won in a raffle at church, just keeping an eye out for crime, which he believes are many in his town, especially with the prevalence of Russians in the area.
And Russians.
In his effort to stop crime in his city, he scoots his way to Gunner's house to ask him about his stolen backpack. Timmy commits that he and his partner are going to find his backpack, to which Gunner asks who he's talking about. Inside Gunner's house, Gunner explains the sitch. He shows Timmy where he usually keeps his backpack in his room, but his real concern is really just the Swiss Army knife in the front pocket. He got the knife from scouting, where he's taught how to survive in the woods using just the knife. After surveying the room, Timmy reaches a profound conclusion. Backpack is indeed gone. As he's about to leave, he stumbles upon Gunner's oldest brother's room. Inside, he finds the man himself, Gabe, sharpening a stick using a fancy knife. He heckles Timmy's scarf and aggressively tells him to leave. As Timmy's leaving the room, however, he doesn't see the very obvious backpack just hanging behind the door. Instead, Timmy leaves with very little clues about the case.
Gabe, very rude.
And he continues writing his memoir late at night. When his mom Patty comes back from work, the two head out to a diner where Timmy tells her that she needs to move her clothes out of the closet because he needs a bigger office space. She refuses, despite his concern about needing a bigger office space to handle his growing operation, but entertains his ideas anyway by promising to get him a copy of office leases so he could think about expansion.
Consider hiring Mother for global planning position.
The next day at school, Timmy's late yet again to Mr. Crockett's class, a man he finds to be problematic. Just as he's about to take his seat, his teacher tells him to take care of Hammy Ham, the class pet, which he initially declines to do. After being threatened with detention, and for mistakenly thinking this means that he will be in jail with a murderer, he reluctantly agrees before taking his seat next to Molly, Rolo, and a girl he calls the Nameless One. He finds them all problematic, but especially the last girl. As he takes his seat, their teacher suddenly hands them a pop quiz, which he promptly turns into a place to let his artistic visions run wild. After doodling all over his test paper, his teacher suddenly announces that their remaining quizzes will be graded based on the average of their quadrants, or their seat arrangements. Rolo is not a fan, especially given Timmy's rather unorthodox way of doing tests. Timmy's not into the idea either, because that would mean he would need to work with the Nameless One. He tells Molly about his reluctance to work with her, to which the teacher notices. Molly encourages Timmy to speak up, but when given the chance to, he simply stands up and says nothing, realizing that he really doesn't want to sit with the Nameless One. However, when his teacher tells him to sit down, he instead drags the table elsewhere before being told to leave.
Get out of my class!
At recess, he goes back to thinking about global planning strategies for his agency. He really needs to find a new office so that the other kids, the Nameless One, or even the Russians, wouldn't be able to listen in on his and Total's controversial conversations. After being called a weirdo by one of the older kids who chased a ball that rolled his way, Timmy tells Total that he would have to head to Gunner's alone that day since he still had to do something. That something being detention.
Whatever, weirdo.
As he's busy scribbling away at an exam paper again, just a few feet away, his teacher and his mother are having a hushed meeting about his grades and his attitude in school. His teacher insists that Timmy doesn't really care. They've had 11 meetings about it already, but nothing seems to be working. Patty insists that Timmy just cares in a different way. To that, his teacher proposes that he might have to be suspended, which is a shame given that he's supposed to be moving on to middle school in the next year, which means more people, more workload, and generally just more stress. Timmy needs to step up his game, and Patty has to stop coddling him too much.
Mistakes were made.
After a half-hearted apology from Timmy to the teacher, mother and son head home. In the car, Timmy's mom practically begs him to help her out by trying not to get suspended, and internally, Timmy just views this as standard concerns. But she didn't need to be. He thinks that 5th grade will simply be the final year of his formal education. The next day, Timmy visits his classmate to pick up Hammy Ham. However, when he gets there, they find an immobile hamster who apparently hasn't moved in 3 days. Timmy jots it down as possible homicide and tells his classmate to step down from her position in the planned committee of the Animal Awareness Month until the case blows over. He places the hamster in a shoebox and makes his way out. From the window, he sees Total dive into the pool, splashing water everywhere, and coldly regards it as unprofessional.
So unprofessional.
He rushes outside, considering that he has to bring the body to the morgue in the soonest possible time, only to find that his most trusted Segway, or what he calls the failure mobile, was nowhere to be seen. With the standing scooter gone, his dreams of going global with total failure suddenly turned to nothing, and his domestic and school life suddenly felt like they were going to be a nightmare. He rushes to Rollo's house, all the while scolding Total for his unprofessional behavior. When Timmy gets to the house, however, he runs into Rollo's mom instead, who tells him that he was out for his fencing class. He takes the address and heads to Rollo's fencing practice and stalks him. He notes that Rollo was training to become an assassin, and that possible betrayal is to be expected. Moments later, Timmy's walking around with Rollo looking for the scooter. Rollo reminds Timmy that he needs to study because they're being graded together now, to which Timmy dismisses as saying that he was too nervous. But Rollo just reminds him of the other times Timmy got him into trouble. With that, Timmy shows Rollo the real gravity of the situation by showing him Hammy Ham's body. Rollo theorizes that whoever killed Hammy Ham probably stole the failure mobile, meaning that it couldn't have been their classmate Maxine, since she was with Timmy the entire time. The only way it could have been stolen was because of a professional hit from none other than the Russians. With that, Timmy heads over to Flo at the library to gather intel. And by intel, he means intel on Russians. You know, just casual intel on Russian spies living in the area. Regular information handed to American citizens on the daily, apparently. As Flo explains to Timmy that he really should just go outside and play, his classmate Molly approaches and hands Flo a bunch of flyers for Animal Awareness Month. Molly tries making small talk with Timmy, who simply lets her know about the anti-bear policy at school, just before dismissing her so he could collaborate with Flo about Russians. Molly perks up at the idea and tells Timmy that she knows some Russians, a man in her church named Boris. He's dead though. There's also Karina, who's part Russian. Also, ta-da, the nameless one is named Karina. Flo chides him on this and asks if he likes her, and Timmy just calls her absurd. With this new info, however, he concludes that Karina, or the nameless one, was a Russian operative, and further confirmed by the fact that Karina did a show and tell with Russian dolls she got from her grandma.
Papa Bear, ready to move.
Back at home, Patty is busy getting ready for a night out while Timmy's barred himself in his little office. When Timmy goes out to check what's up, his mom tells him that she invited a guy over for dinner, a meter maid from the police department that Timmy regards as an underachiever. Timmy goes to open the door for Crispin, and the two have a little chat. Crispin has a box of chocolates for his mom and a little rabbit's foot for Timmy, which Timmy took to mean that Crispin maims rabbits. Patty goes out to the porch to greet Crispin as well and invites him in.
You may enter our home.
Later that evening, out back, the three have a nice dinner together, which Timmy attempts to end quite early with a meter maid joke about Crispin not really having the proper permits to be there with them. Crispin takes this lightly and tells him and Patty that he became a meter maid to help change people's perceptions of them being unlikable. When Crispin invites him over to the precinct for a tour, Timmy declines, saying that he doesn't really need to collaborate with the local law enforcement because he has a partner with him.
Negative.
The next day, Timmy speaks with the school counselor to talk about him having a difficult time in class. Timmy dismisses his question and asks him about his office and the rent. The counselor calmly tries to pivot the question back to get Timmy to talk about what he's thinking about. Timmy asks for reassurance that the place isn't bugged before speaking, but is doubtful as he daydreams about how the Russians in his neighborhood are spying on him.
I think we're done here.
We have 20 more minutes, actually.
After his meeting, he goes around the neighborhood with Total and Rollo. He tells Rollo that Karina was a spy and the two head for her house. There, they spot her playing with water guns and she greets them both before running off to her dad, some guy with a cool car and owns a bank. Rollo insists that she and her dad were really nice as well. But with Timmy's new intel about Karina's dad being a banker, he deduces that the scooter was probably hidden in the bank.
Rollo took us. Still has nervous condition.
When he gets home, however, Patty has already found out that the scooter was missing, and he makes an excuse that he lent it to Molly for her rally for Animal Awareness Month. He pretends to have a crush on her and buys him just a little bit of time to find the scooter. The only caveat is that Patty was going to call Molly's mother, so he had to run across town to get to Molly first.
And I'm calling Molly Moskin's mother.
and strike a deal with her. Over tea, the two talk about how Molly's mom has to tell his mom that she has the scooter just to cover for him. Molly's curious why he chose her, and he makes an excuse and says that his detective agency chose her. Molly asks him if he's heard about the purse snatchings around town lately, but they're interrupted by Señor Burrito, Molly's cat. Molly agrees and reaches over to hold his hands. Timmy pulls away and tells her that she's being unprofessional. Molly takes offense to this and tells him that in order for her to cover for Timmy, he'll have to sign up for the Animal Awareness Month rally and paint her nails and let her paint his nails.
Be professional, Molly.
At first he declines, but the next day, he, Molly, and the rest of their quadrant take the quiz that Timmy didn't study for. Timmy asks Rollo to help him with the bank, but declines just before their teacher scolds Timmy for talking during the quiz.
I was mouthing.
No mouthing.
After school, however, Rollo goes downtown with Timmy anyway, despite the risk of getting absolutely screwed. When they reach the bank, the two put on fencing masks to hide their faces, and they try to make their way to the vault. You know, like how normal guys in fencing masks do on a regular banking day? Of course, a security guard approaches them and asks them to take off their masks so that they can be seen by the cameras.
Remove those masks now.
And that's when it hit Timmy. They were set up. The two make a run for it, and soon after, Timmy is back in the counselor's office. The counselor tells Timmy that he's had the place swept of bugs and that he could talk freely. With that reassurance in mind, Timmy tells the counselor that he was a detective and that he's been having troubles with his agency. Someone has been sabotaging it. The counselor asks if his mom knows about this, and he simply responds by saying that his mom has been collaborating with the local law enforcement, which really isn't his style. The counselor takes this as an opportunity to help out Timmy by asking him to work for him undercover, particularly in Mr. Crocus' class, the teacher that's been complaining about his attitude in school. He wants intel on him, particularly on homework, and Timmy has to submit it completed. After this little agreement from the two, we see Timmy in the meeting for the Animal Awareness Month rally. While the rest of the class is divided into groups, Timmy sits in the corner. Flo tries to get him to join a group, but Molly speaks up for him and says that he's protesting the anti-bear policy in place.
What is he protesting?
Probably the anti-bear policy?
Flo asks him to elaborate on it, but he keeps his mouth shut. Flo tries to encourage him a little more, but he simply says his usual curt affirmative. As he sits there in the gym, he imagines Total trying to enact the mission with utmost discretion, at least as much discretion as a 1,500-pound polar bear can have. Upon coming to the conclusion that Total might not be able to handle the job, he suddenly wakes up at the empty gym and leaves school, only to find Crispin waiting for him outside to give him a ride home. Crispin tries his best to strike up a conversation with Timmy, asking him about school, offering him bear claws that Timmy imagines as actual bear claws, and even asking him if he wants to go bowling. Timmy, as usual, brushes all of this off, which prompts Crispin to tell him that he knows that it's weird that he's dating his mother, and reassures him that he really likes her and that he's working on himself too, like going to therapy. After opening up like that to Timmy, he tells Timmy that the normal thing to do was to say something back like, "Thank you for sharing." Timmy responds with his usual, "Normal is for normal people," and that his mother doesn't really like normal people.
Normal's for normal people.
This prompts Crispin to pull over and clear his good name by saying that he's a nice parking officer, which is already a rare thing, and tell Timmy that what he said was really mean. Timmy says that he's been mean to Timmy as well, and even accuses him of kidnapping him. Crispin tries to clarify, saying that he could get out anytime he wants, which Timmy, sure enough, takes as a clear sign to hop off and go home alone.
Oh no, come on, buddy!
Later that night, he does his casework for his new client. In other words, he's doing homework for the counselor. Patty tries to talk to him about what happened with Crispin, but he doesn't really want to. Patty tries to tell him that he really likes this guy and that they've had a lot of fun together, which Timmy imagines to be them smashing up little libraries around town. After this, Patty opens up about another big thing. They have to move. She can't pay their rent in their current place. Timmy isn't very happy about this because that would mean a relocation for his office. He yells at Patty, saying that he simply can't move his agency at the drop of a hat.
Do not hire mother. Unreliable.
After a tense night, the following day, he goes on a school field trip to the dam. Mr. Crocus approaches him and tells him that he doesn't want any trouble from Timmy. One wrong move and he's suspended. When they arrive at the dam, Karina suddenly asks the tour guide about the security in the area, which Timmy finds odd.
Do you have security at this site?
All of a sudden, all of the kids start chiming in about security and the purse snatchings around town until Mr. Crocus hushes them all. When it hits Timmy, Karina is probably executing the master plan if she was so concerned about security. In his mind, she's planning on shutting off the power to the entirety of Portland. With that, he tries to get Rollo to join him again and help him stop Karina. Rollo isn't really willing, so Timmy strikes a deal with him and promises to study if he helps him out. Rollo takes the deal and tries to distract Mr. Crocus as the kids are leaving the area.
What's wrong with you?
Nothing.
He doesn't notice Timmy running to a restricted zone until a guard calls him out. Mr. Crocus tries to chase him and follows his voice as he tries looking for Karina. Timmy looks everywhere around the dam, not really realizing that Karina is with the rest of the class where they're supposed to be. He tries calling for backup, but Total is totally busy drinking water from a shower. Meanwhile, Timmy eventually stumbles on a hallway that's just filled with doors. Mr. Crocus eventually finds him opening and closing each one until he eventually is left with one that has a restricted sign on it. Mr. Crocus threatens him by saying he'll never reach 6th grade if he were to go through.
I guarantee you'll never make it to 6th grade.
So guess what good old Timmy did? As he's walking through the bridges, his red scarf gets caught on the railings and he's stuck. Mr. Crocus manages to catch up but struggles due to his fear of heights. He scolds Timmy the whole time and tells him that he's quitting on him just before the warning for floodgates starts. With the water threatening to wash them away, Mr. Crocus rips Timmy's scarf to free him, and the two run to the door, which locked itself. With that, Mr. Crocus drops on the floor and tells Timmy to do the same. Good old Timmy instead uses his body to protect Mr. Crocus, just as the waters pour out. But embarrassingly enough, after this incident, the school talks to Patty, and Patty talks to her boss. She doesn't say anything to Timmy just yet though, and the two quietly go back home. There, Patty scolds him and tells him that he's been suspended for 3 days. If the counselor hadn't stepped in, he would have been expelled. When Timmy asks if she should be on her way back to work at that point, Patty tells him that she's been fired because she has to stay at home to take care of him the entire time. When she brings up that he's going to middle school the next year, he insists that he isn't. Instead, he's moving his agency downtown, which pushes Patty to shut down his entire operation. She takes down the license he had taped up on her closet door and gathers his detective gear and throws them in the garage. Timmy tries to remind her of a thing she always tells him: normal is for normal people. But this time, she just tells him that he needs to fit in and grow up. Just like that, his agency was gone, and the two eventually had to move.
You have got to fit in. You got to grow up.
After his suspension, he goes back to school and submits the homework, or rather the intel, to the counselor and sits in his quadrant in class, this time without his iconic red scarf. A different teacher goes inside the classroom. Apparently, Mr. Crocus has gone on vacation after the incident. After school, Timmy sits on the floor of their new home just as Patty arrives. He answers in a monochrome and tells her that he's done his homework already. Noticing the change in behavior, Patty tries to reassure him that everything is going to be fine, but he doesn't really respond. With his agency now gone, he's forced to let go of his one employee, Total. He drops him off at the zoo, and the two agree to part ways. As Timmy hugs him, he remembers the day his father left them all of a sudden and how Total came into his life by surprise. Timmy, the once stellar detective in his own little story, was now just a lonely boy. As the Animal Awareness Month activities draw near, he stumbles on a booth set up by Karina, who's selling cookies to support the cause. She gives him one for free, and he just takes it and stares at it while sitting in the school's courtyard. The counselor comes up to him and chats him up, telling him that he has had some really good intel, but he wanted to know first why he missed their regular meeting. Timmy tells him that he doesn't really need to go anymore, since he was normal now, and his plan was now to go to middle school and fit in with the rest of the school. The counselor tells him frankly that he just can't be like them. He was different, and that his life was unique. Timmy lets him know that the agency is closed now and that he doesn't really have a choice. When he says this, the counselor tells him that he has to own up to his mistakes, learn from them, and adapt. After listening to the counselor tell him about how he worked around getting his car stolen and still going to work because of this love for the job, Timmy is given a lot to think about. He picks up his cookie and notices a little string jutting out. As he pulls it, he sees a chip with the words "Russian listening device" written on it. He screams, causing the entire playground to stop and stare, and for the Russians like Karina to suddenly remove their headphones because of the volume. There's work to be done and he needs his partner back. With his will back, he decides to collaborate with local law enforcement by going to Crispin and asking his help for admission into the zoo. Crispin is psyched and agrees to take him. But when they get there, the polar bear enclosure was closed according to an employee, and all the bears were at the Hogle Zoo, all the way in Utah. Timmy rushes to the polar bear enclosure anyway without Crispin and calls out to Total with his walkie-talkie again before entering the area. When he doesn't respond and there's no bears to be seen in the area, he almost gives up until he hears static in the walkie-talkie. Behind him, Total is swimming in the enclosure, and the two are reunited again. On the way home, they encounter the purse snatcher running away from the scene, and Crispin, with Timmy's encouragement, follows him. Crispin moves slowly, cautiously, as he leaves the car and approaches the snatcher. Crispin trusts him a little too much, and so much for being likable. Timmy sees the snatcher try to overpower Crispin and drives the car towards the two of them. He successfully breaks apart the two, but Timmy is a kid that doesn't know how to drive, so he crashes the car into a house across the street with Total at the back. And ta-da, it's Mr. Crocus' living room. And honestly, if I were this man, I'd probably just die of a heart attack every time I saw a child with a red scarf. No wonder the guy took some time off. But that's just in Timmy's imagination. Instead, he let the local law enforcement do their jobs and arrest the man. As he watches the scene unfold though, a lady tells him to back up the car. He does, and he bumps it against a light post. In the hospital, Patty arrives to pick him up and tells him that she was worried sick about him. To Patty's surprise, Timmy apologizes and explains that he was just trying to get his agency back, especially if he's going to go to middle school. Patty thinks for a bit and tells him that she wants him to have his agency back and that she's sorry for the mistake she made. With that, the two promise to do better next time.
I want you to have your agency back.
A little while later, Timmy invites Crispin to the Animal Awareness Month rally. Crispin says he'll try to come before giving him Russia-related intel. He leads him to the local police department's inventory, and lo and behold, there's Patty's scooter. It was illegally parked and was taken there. At the rally, Flo calls Molly to the stage while Patty sits in the crowd with Rolo, wondering where Timmy and her scooter are. Then, just as Molly finishes her speech, Timmy scoots in with his polar bear. He talks about the school's unjust no bear policy and talks about his polar bear Total. He tells the crowd that everyone, polar bears included, were capable of greatness, and that the time may come that, like polar bears, they would have to adapt to their changing environment as well. But that doesn't mean that they have to stop being who they are. The crowd cheers him on, and the rally for Animal Awareness Month is a success. As Timothy roams with the scooter, he sees Karina and imagines that Crocus was probably abducted by the Russians. No matter, he was there to save him.